my name is Annalise Reyes. Today I will be working on teaching a lesson regarding data analysis for the 3rd grade. I do have a visual aid today to assist me with our PowerPoint. Okay, so my TEK today would be to focus on data analysis. What we're going to be doing is collecting data, organizing it and displaying it, as well as interpreting it within a graph. The 4 focuses of the 4 graphs we'll be working on will be a frequency table, dot plot, pictograph, and a bar graph, some with scaled intervals. And we'll also be working on solve 1 and 2 step problems using categorical data represented with a frequency table, dot plot, pictograph, and bar graph with scaled interval. The objective will be to have students to collect, organize, display, and interpret data. They will summarize a data set with multiple categories displayed in the graphs that we did express, which is the frequency table, dot plot, pictograph, and a bar graph. They will solve 1 and 2 step problems using categorical data displayed on the graphs. The previous knowledge includes the students applying mathematical process standards to organize the data that is collected and interpreted information and represented on a graph. Their previous knowledge, but this would be information that they pretty much collected through the 2nd grade. It would be really focused, they had focused on understanding representation of what is in a graph, so such as the length of a bar, what it means, why it would, grow taller, or why it would get taller or longer, or what it means for a picture and a pictograph, to what it represents. Okay, and also they were taught to organize and collect data, a collection of data for up to about 4 categories, using pictographs and bar graphs. So they really focused on about, mostly pictographs and bar graphs. They also learned mostly 1-step word problems involving addition or subtraction using data represented within pictographs and bar graphs with 1 interval. They were also taught to mainly focus on drawing conclusions and making predictions from information in a graph. So for today's activity, what we'll be working on is we will have a baggie of shapes, about 5 in each baggie. So I will show you. So you want your students to have a baggie each with about 5 shapes in them. So you can have like a small sandwich bag, for example. You also want as materials for markers for your students and blank paper, so that way they can be able to collect their data and write out representations of it for it. So this would be considered attribute materials. Okay. So I decided to choose paper shapes. So here I have 2 trapezoids, a rhombus, a circle, and an octagon. Okay. So in my activity, what I will be focusing on is I want my students to be able to independently observe, take their time a little bit to look at their shapes, observe their color, the number of angles, line segments, the number of each shape that they have from their baggie. Okay, so let's just take some time to do that. So for example, I have 2 trapezoids, so I create my own little category there. I have 1 rhombus, 1 octagon, and 1 circle. So that would be my 5 shapes. And you can line them up however you want to. This is a great time for the teacher as the instructor to be able to walk around, observe your students, maybe help them kind of categorize or point out some attributes that each shape has. Great time to kind of bond with them and really focus on what it is that they might struggle with as far as vocabulary or observing each shape. So for example, with my trapezoids, I have 2 trapezoids, 2 different colors of them, and I have about 4 line segments of each. And okay, so I have 4 angles. So those are some attributes that I observed with my octagon. Same interesting information. So about 8 line segments, about 8 angles, things like that. And it's orange. I only have 1 of these from a quantity. My rhombus, I have about 4 angles, 4 line segments. It is the color green, and I only have 1 of my quantity of them. So for my circle, when it comes to categories, I have no line segments, no angles, and it's only one of them. Okay. So those are some attributes or characteristics, some traits of each shape that I have. Okay, for my collected data. So there's just some information. I mean, you can have your students write down some of those attributes if you'd like, or you can just simply have them visually look at each one and then just make observations. And you can do this for about a minute or 2, preferably about a minute. And then from there, they'll take all their shapes and they'll gather them in their little baggie. Okay. Let's go ahead and put it there. Okay, so the next step that we'll be working on is that you'll have them, after about a minute of observing their shapes, they'll go ahead and take mental note of it, and they'll get into groups of 4. And each individual will gather together and bring along their baggie, as well as any notes they possibly took or anything like that. And what they'll go ahead and do is they'll gather together and have open discussion and discuss what observations they've made regarding their shapes. So for example, not every student's going to have the same shapes. It's best to have them randomized. So for example, I didn't have like one of each shape. I had 2 trapezoids and then pretty much one of each shape after that. I prefer to have them random in each baggie because of the fact that when they get together, they're going to have different quantities if possible. Maybe there's 2 other students that have circles. You know, just one of the students has an octagon, or maybe 3 trapezoids and 2 rhombuses, for example. In this situation, you know, the student didn't have any squares. They didn't have any triangles either. So one of the other students in that group might have a triangle. Okay. So that's why it's great to collaborate together to observe and collect the data. So in my case, what I chose for us was to mainly focus on observing what we have as material attributes. So it's just observed data. We actually didn't collect a survey or anything like that, which I'd like to do tomorrow to be able to discuss to create a different type of graph. Preferably the same types of graph of representation. However, I want them to be able to be creative in choosing a question that they'd like to ask their peers and organize their data in groups based on their questions and be creative with that. Okay. So once they collect all their data, then I will go ahead and pass, as the instructor, I would like to pass out the information as far as which graph they will be representing. So for example, in this case, and you'll have different groups that they might have the same graph more than likely, or the same chart, same type, but the data that they'll be collecting is a little different because each one, of course, that's part of the purpose of the randomizing of the number of shapes and the colors and things like that. Now you can use, of course, any type of construction paper. You don't have to use the colors I use. The primary colors I use is orange, red, and green, but of course you can use any type. Definitely if you want to use stickers or something like that, or sparkly objects, you definitely can, which add greater traits to each shape. Now, after they go ahead and make their observations, collect everything together, and they do go ahead and write down, that's definitely the time when you want to have one person in the group of each group go ahead and write down their own observations all together based on all the shapes. Now, since it is 5 shapes per person and there's 4 individuals, you should see a total of 20 different shapes that have attributes, and they're all categorized based on their own color, the number of shapes that they may have, the number of angles, the line segments, and things like that in their baggie from their baggies that they had. Okay. Now, for provisions, I'm sorry about that. Excuse me. Now, provisions would be, you can definitely label your shapes, so that way it kind of helps the student be able to actually visually see and have it labeled. So for example, you just write down circle, or you can even tell them how to write it out for you, kind of thing, so that way they can label it and kind of put word with representation, so they can have a little bit more referencing. So you would have them label each shape. Another provision would be for your English language learners. Definitely the best part about collaborating with them is that way they can practice their language skills. You know, expressing any type of observation that they made from their shapes would be a great practice for them. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so for my first graph that we were working with will be a pictograph. Sorry about that. Will be a pictograph. So in my title, my pretend group that I have for my students of 4, and there's a total number of 20 shapes there. I had them use a question as their title. So it is, what is the number of each shape in each group? So for example, what they did was they did their categories of each shape, and they did as well as the number of shapes. So this is how they went ahead and used their pictograph. They use their label, their category, and they have the number. So they represented it by the shape itself. So circles, I had in this group, I had 3 circles. Rhombus, 2 rhombuses. Octagon, 1. Square, I had 4 of them. Trapezoid, I had 2. Triangle, 4. And rectangle, I had 4 as well. And as if you notice, this would be considered like the provision. You have your labels on each shape. Okay. Okay, so based off of the same information from the pictograph, I have a frequency table. So in this case, I used tallies to be able to create my tally chart for the frequency table. So colors of each shape would be my title, and I did my categories would be the name of colors, such as red, orange, and green. As I explained, those are my primary colors that I decided to choose from my construction paper for my shapes. And if you notice, based on this information, I just transferred it over to this as representation in a different format. I have 7 red shapes, 6 orange, and I have 7 green. Now moving on to the next type. I have a dot plot. The title of my shapes, it would be shapes number of line segments. So, in this situation, I have 3 different shapes with no line segments. So this would be based off of this information. So I had 3 circles. So I had no line segments on this one. And with a dot plot, you definitely want to have it continuous. So in this situation, I only had from no line segments to 8. And then I have 3 shapes with 3 different lines. I'm sorry. I have 4 shapes with 3 different line segments. So this is the number of line segments. And there would be 4 line segments, and this would be my total of shapes with at least 4 line segments. So I have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So about 12. And I have my octagon, which would be the 8 line segments. And for my final graph, I have a bar graph, which titled as the shape's number of angles. So this would be our y-axis, our x-axis. And in this situation, I did the intervals. So the number of angles I have between 0, which would be my circles, to 3, which would be my triangles. So altogether, those shapes equaled out to about 7 shapes for this interval. From 4 to 6, number of angles, add up to 12. Between 7 to 10, number of angles. So you definitely want to make it continuous as well for your intervals. I had only one, which would be my octagon. In closing, I have open discussion with my students, so that way they can be able to work on explaining and getting out all their information, their observations based on how to use a graph, to understand that a graph is a tool to be able to interpret data. Tomorrow, I will definitely be focusing on we'll still be working with charts and graphs, but as I was explaining, we'll think of questions we can ask everyone to collect the data from. Then we can do our charts and graphs resulting from that organized data as a random sample from the survey of information collected. Now, during the presentations, I will invite other students to participate by discussing similarities and differences among strategies presented, and to ask questions about any strategy during the presentation. I will push for details to help students clarify their ideas and explanations. So I definitely want them to get on the open any confusion that they might have in regards to using the graph, get on any questions, or just their thoughts. So this is a great exercise. I find it really fun and creative. There's a lot of cool things you can do with it. You don't necessarily have to use shapes in a baggie. You can use really anything. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be the basics, squares or anything like that. You can definitely make it your own. So thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a great day. Bye.